simply is not true that the enormous increase in the well-being of the free countries of the West arose out of slavery. Slavery was a blot on our scutcheon, there is no question. And of course, it was a disgrace to this country to have had slavery as long as it did. But if you take Britain, which did not have slavery, Japan did not have slaves in the 100 years since the Meiji Restoration. Hong Kong today does not have slaves. And you ask yourself, if you want to know how people feel, ordinary people feel, about different systems, you ask how they vote with their feet.
The U.S. economy was built on vicious and murderous slave labor.
Simply is not true.
These slave labor camps in the South producing cotton that would have impressed the Nazis. And they were quite efficient. Efficiency was in fact increased. Productivity was increased rapidly through the technology of a bullwhip and a pistol, just by torturing people much more viciously. And that's the source, that's a large part of the source of the modern economy. Not just cotton, of course, was the fuel of the early industrial revolution, but it's not just cotton production. Cotton production, which expanded over the world, based very heavily in slave labor camps here, was the basis for the development of a lot of the merchant class of early industrialization. The biggest industrializations anywhere were the textile mills in Lowell and Lancashire and so on. Developed the financial systems which were used to finance it and arrange interactions. It became globalized. That's an enormous contribution to the developing economy of the United States.
Apparently, capitalism, not capitalism, but slavery and colonialism has been the worst things that has ever happened to an entire human race. I'm speaking about the race of the Negro, because we have three races. We have the Negro, we have the Mongoloids, and then we have the Caucasians. The Negroes have faced a lot of challenges, and some of these challenges that the Negroes have faced, sorry for using this word, is slavery and colonialism. These are the biggest. Many people throughout history have come around to try and explain why Africans are suffering. Yes, many people, religious leaders, we have the religious aspect. Some people are associating the suffering of black people with the curse of Ham. Remember, after Noah's Ark, he was drunk one time, he got naked, and one of his sons looked at his nakedness and laughed. His name was Ham. And so Noah cursed Ham, and because Noah cursed Ham, Noah now became the descendants of black, and that's why black people are suffering. Some people associate it to that. Some people, not Evans from Kenya. Okay, now there is a different perspective that white man can give, Some people associate the sufferings of now Africans, they associate the suffering of black people with the prophetic book, with the holy book of the Holy Bible, the Judaic Bible and the Christian Bible, because it is written that the descendants will flee away and they'll suffer for many years, and then after some time they'll come back. That is another translation that people give. By no any means can I go against what's written in the Bible. I'm just here to present a perspective of a white man by the name Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman is one of the important voices we had back then. He's like Arikana Chombori of today, but of the past. He might not be alive because this speech was made in 1978. Now this white man, Milton Friedman, is trying to explain the suffering of black people, and he's associating this with capitalism. Yes, he is now looking at the suffering of white people with the perspective of economics of capitalism, and he's saying capitalism is the reason why black people are suffering a lot. I don't know what you think, but I want us to watch this video, and then I will give you my perspective by the end of the video, where we will have a critical analysis. So without further ado, let's jump into this video, and then I'll catch up.
First, you talk about the injustices which prevail in the so-called communist countries, and then the free societies which exist in the capitalist countries and the wealth that has been created there. But you restrict your arguments to the Western European countries, the United States and Japan. What you fail to point out is that most of the countries in the world are capitalist. That is, the means of production are owned privately, or the accumulation of wealth is privately accumulated. Most of these countries have severely repressive governments, and most of them suffer from huge unemployment rates, hunger, and poverty. If we look at India as compared to China, which has twice as many people, and under its system, the Chinese system, has been able to achieve things for the masses of people which India could not even consider. The same thing goes...
Would you come to your question, please?
All right. Just two more points, because excuse me, I'd like a little bit of free speech myself.
That's okay. We don't want to deny you free speech. We just want to have as many people as possible.
Thank you very much.
And I think we've
I agree with you, so let me finish. All right. The problem which a lot of us feel is, first, you did not mention, in terms of the countries you were pinpointing, such barbarous countries as South Africa and Zimbabwe. And in terms of giving your appraisal of the riches that have been accumulated in the Western so-called democracies, capitalist democracies, I would like you to give us an honest evaluation of just how these countries got so rich so quick, and that direct relationship of that to the fact that there were slaves that worked free labor, and the wealth that was created in this society being a direct product of that relationship, and also of the colonial relationships of the Western European countries and the wealth which they bled out of the people in their colonial domain.
I will be glad to answer those questions. First of all, there's a sense in which every country in the world is capitalist. Soviet Union is capitalist. Every country in the world has large capital under control. And the real question is, of course, the organization whereby the capital is controlled. In the Soviet Union, it is controlled by the state or by officials of the state. In the second place, I have been talking for an hour. I would like to talk to you for 10 hours. In a full discussion, I would certainly agree with you that capitalism is not a sufficient condition for freedom. It's a necessary condition for freedom. I never said that wherever you had capitalism, you had freedom. I never said that. I never made that statement. I made the opposite statement. Wherever you had freedom, you had capitalism. Capitalism is a necessary condition for freedom, but not a sufficient condition for freedom. In addition, you need relatively broad access to capital and a relatively free market. Again, relatively. You need competition. I usually refer to it as competitive capitalism to distinguish it from certain kinds of systems which have been capitalist and have all of the bad qualities that you describe. In the second place, because I don't want to take too much time, to go to your final points. In the second place, it simply is not true that the enormous increase in the well-being of the free countries of the West arose out of slavery. Slavery was a blot on our scutcheon, there is no question. And of course, it was a disgrace to this country to have had slavery as long as it did. But if you take Britain, which did not have slavery, I'm going to go to the colonies, that's the next point. I'm trying to take one point at a time. The gentleman made two separate points. One had to do with slavery, and one had to do with colonies. Britain did not have slaves. Japan did not have slaves in the 100 years since the Meiji Restoration. Hong Kong today does not have slaves. And you ask yourself, if you want to know how people feel, ordinary people feel about different systems, you ask how they vote with their feet. And you ask whether it's Hong Kong that has to put up police to keep people from Hong Kong going into China, or it's China that has to put up police to keep people from China going into Hong Kong. So look at the way people vote with their feet before you judge which society gives them better conditions. But in any event, let me go to the final point of colonies. In the first place, it's not true that the wealth or the benefits of the West derive from exploiting the colonies. The facts are against you. The reason why you say that is because it is so hard for people to get out of the notion that life is a zero-sum game. They think if one man benefits, another must lose. But in a free market, both people can benefit. Now, if you take the case of Africa, the wheel had not been invented in parts of Africa by the end of the 19th century. The number of people in Africa and their average conditions of life in Africa have grown enormously as a result of their contacts with the West.
You don't know your history, sir.
Well, I would say you don't know your facts, sir.
Because they didn't have the wheel and they hadn't created welfare society.
In the case of India, which is a very famous case, If you look again at the facts, all of the studies have shown that it cost Britain more to maintain India. These are some famous studies by Jacob Viner, which went into the details of it in great detail. Colonialism has always cost the mother country more than it ever gotten any direct or indirect economic benefits. So far as India was concerned, the history of India is divided into three periods. The period of British rule in the 19th and early 20th century, when there was very real progress in the standard of life of the people of India. The period of the 20s and the 30s, when there was a great struggle against Britain and for independence, when there was essential stagnation in India and there was no growth. The period since the creation of independence in 1948, when you have had a highly centralized government, when unfortunately it was Harold Lasky and not Adam Smith, who was the most respected intellectual figure in India, when the Indian people have lost, not improved, when the average amount of food and so on has been going down, not up. The people of India have been worse off under independent, non-colonial government than they had been before. So, colonialism. Well, first of all, where do you have colonialism today? You have the classic colonialism behind the behind the Iron Curtain. You have Russia, which is a master country. I mean, not the Union of Socialist Soviet Republics, but Russia, which is a master country with a great colony around it within the Soviet Union, in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, in Hungary. That's the great example today of your classic kind of colonialism. The United States, with trivial exceptions, has never been a colonial country. It did have Philippines. It had Philippines for a while. Cuba was not a colony of the United States. In any event, you need a sense of proportion. In the period between the revolution in 1776 and 1898, the U.S. had no colonies. And yet the U.S., that was a period of the greatest growth and the greatest economic development of the United States.
Mexico?
Your question.
I see society as more and more tending toward the usurping of my individual rights and freedoms as time goes by. What do you see as the ultimate end of this, i.e. either in democracy or socialism, and why do you think the individuals within the society are letting this happen to them?
Well, the last part of your question is the hardest one to answer. If we continue along the road we've been going on, of usurping more and more power to governmental officials to control our lives, I see only one end, and that's a loss of anything that has any meaning as democracy, a loss of human freedom, and a prison state. That's the end. Now, why are people letting this happen to them? That's a much more difficult question to answer. And I think it is largely because of ignorance about where they are going, a lack of recognition. I don't believe they want to go this road, but I believe they are unwittingly letting themselves go down this road because on each issue that comes up, people look at their separate special interest instead of the broader interest in governmental activity. Everybody wants to cut down government, provided that those things he has an interest in are maintained. I remember very well the summit conference in Washington on inflation that President Ford had about 2 or 3 years ago, in which one representative after another got up and said, in order to stop inflation, we have to cut the government budget. The way to cut the government budget is to spend more on my interests. That's how each separate group does it. So I think we are being driven down this road fundamentally by a defect in our political structure, a defect which allows each of these separate elements of government to be voted on separately and never gets the citizen to look at the totality of it and see what the whole thing adds up. The solution is for people like you and me to talk to ourselves and to our fellows and to try to persuade our fellow men to be of like mind, to change the climate of opinion in these respects, to try to correct the political structure to impose I've been recently working on one particular proposal along those lines, which is to have constitutional amendments setting a maximum limit to the amount the government may spend. I won't go into the details of that. But I think fundamentally, we are getting what the public at large is asking for. And the public is asking for it, I believe, because they do not understand where it's going to lead them, because they are misinformed. And they are being led that way by the intellectual community, which has gone down a wrong road, in my opinion. Now, I don't believe the case is hopeless. I believe there are many signs of change. There are many more people who recognize the problems with this road now than did 20 or 30 years ago. Experience is a wonderful teacher. So that I think you and I just have to keep on doing our little things, trying to persuade our fellows men to be of like mind. Thank you. Let's take the next question.
I think you've done an excellent job tonight of defending capitalism. Capitalism has treated you well. In general, it's treated the people in this audience well. And as you say, people respond to things based on their self-interest, so I think they've responded well to you. What I'd like to get to now is the question of the relationship between morality and economic policy, which you talked about before in terms of the quotes from Thoreau. You said that the worst sort of person is the person who's going to try to be charitable and is going to try to be... Well, you said that it's unwise for a person to be charitable or to be sincere.
No,
what did you say then?
Let me repeat Thoreau's words. Thoreau's words were, if I knew for certain that a man was coming to my
I think we heard
coming to my house with the conscious design of doing me good, I should run for my life. Now, that's not the same thing as being charitable.
Okay, fine. I'll accept that distinction. Take what Thoreau just said and you've echoed and apply it to American business. And I think what you're basically saying is American business, a corporation.
To businessman.
You are the head of a corporation.
Oh, you're applying to me as the head of a corporation. Right.
Can I ask you the question, please?
Sure.
Now, it seems to me that the implication is that that corporation should not try to do anyone else good, because then the people would run away. What they should do is pursue their own self-interest. That means profit. And what I'd like to talk about is the implications of that in terms of three concrete examples. I believe that a couple of years ago, when there was a major flood in Pennsylvania, you came out as opposed to aid for those disaster victims, based on the rationale that they had bought the land at lower prices because the risk was known, and they shouldn't be given any aid. I'd like people to consider the implications of that. Secondly...
That isn't what I came out against. I came out against the government providing flood insurance at low cost in advance. I did not come out against private individuals giving charity to the people.
But what about disaster aid by the government?
I think
government insurance of nuclear power plants.
Well, it's the same thing. The nuclear power plants ought to be required to pay for full insurance themselves, and that ought to be incorporated in their charges. I'm not in favor of government subsidization of nuclear power plant insurance.
Okay, a second...
Look, don't attribute to me your conventional views of what, quote, a conservative believes, because I'm not a conservative. I'm a believer in freedom.
Well, then I'd like to talk about that using an example, freedom. In Ohio, an old man failed to pay his electric bill. You may be familiar with the case. And the electric company turned off the electricity and he died. The reason they turned it off was because it wouldn't have been profitable for them to keep it on because he didn't pay his bill. Do you believe that was right?
I don't know the details of that case at all, but I can well believe, but I'll be glad to... No, excuse me. In many of these cases, you hear stories which, when you find the details, are very different from those that are presented. But let's suppose it were true, which is what I was going to go on to say. You know, why do you want to stop me? Why do you assume I'm always going to give the wrong answer? Let's assume the facts were true. The result is tragic. Who is responsible? Is it really the responsibility? Should I blame the people? Let's suppose that for a moment, let's suppose that the electric company were to follow the practice of never turning off anybody's electricity. Let's just for a moment take that other extreme. Then this wouldn't have happened. Who would pay the cost?
Are those the only two alternatives?
Well, for a moment, we can come to other alternatives, but I just want to show you the logic of the case. Because I want to show you...
absurdity.
No, it's not an absurdity, because I want to show you that what you have to ask about are the costs imposed on different individuals. The electric company is meaningless. The electric company is a non-human institution. The electric company, what you must talk about are either the stockholders of the electric company, the employees of the electric company, or the customers of the electric company. Those are the people involved. Now, if you go to the other extreme and adopt a policy that the electric company will never turn anything off, then you effectively institute a system under which the only people who will pay for electricity will be those who pay for it voluntarily. Now, the number of people who will do that...
Are those the only two alternatives?
No, but I'm just showing you, I want to go, you've gone to one extreme, I'm going to the other extreme and show you that where the responsibility really lies for the kind of thing you're describing. The responsibility really lies not on the electric company for turning it off, but on those of this man's neighbors and friends and associates who are not charitable enough to enable him as an individual to meet the electric bill. You're blaming the wrong person for what happened.
Okay, well, I think people understand that example. I have just one more. This has to do with the Ford Pinto. I'm not sure if you're aware of the recent revelations that have come out about the production of that car. Ford produced it knowing full well that in any rear-end collision, the gas tank would blow up because they had failed to install a $13 plastic block in front of the gas tank. And Ford estimated in an internal memo that that would cost about 200 lives a year. And they estimated further that the cost of each life would be $200,000. They multiplied and they found that the cost of installing those blocks in each of the cars would be more than the cost of saving those 200 lives. And over the past 7 years, the car has been produced and over 1,000 lives have been lost. It seems to me that Ford did what would be the right thing according to your policy. And yet that seems to me to be very wrong.
Well, let me ask you, let's suppose it would have cost $1 billion per person. Should Ford have put them in nonetheless?
You see, you're really only, question of
you know that you're really only arguing about price. You're not arguing about principle. No. Because you cannot, nobody can take the principle. Nobody can accept the principle that an infinite value should be put on an individual life. Because in order to get the money involved, in order to get the resources involved, it's not money. In order to get the resources, they have to come from somewhere. And you want the policy which maximizes the situation overall. You cannot accept a situation that 1 million people should starve in order to provide one person with a car that is completely safe.
That's absolutely right.
Right, and therefore you're not arguing anything about principle. You're just arguing whether Ford used $200,000 was the right number or not.
No, I'm not arguing
Suppose
that
it were
at all.
$200 million.
No.
Suppose it were $200 million. What should Ford have done?
$200 million for what?
Suppose it would have cost $200 million per life saved. Should Ford still have spent that $200 million?
You mean per...
That's not the question.
That's not really the question.
Yes, it is a question.
That's not the question.
So
Yes,
that's the principle of the question. That's the only principle involved. I don't know whether Ford came to the right answer or not. That's a question of whether these numbers are valid numbers for the relative costs of different things. You're not arguing about a principle if you once agree with me that if it had been $200 million, the cost per life saved had been $200 million. You would not argue. Look, let me go back for a moment.
Can I say something in response to that? If Ford had not been able to market those cars in the same kind of economic bracket because of the price of installing this one plastic block, that would be a different question. Maybe Ford could have considered redesigning the whole car so as to make it cheaper. But what we're talking about is balancing advantages and balancing principles.
And that's why
Just a minute. I'm a supporter of abortion. Therefore, I don't believe that every single human life is sacred. I believe that principles have to be balanced. And yet, I don't see Ford spending $13 less on each car at the cost of 200 lives a year as being...
Now, after listening to Milton Friedman, the thing I can say is this. It is true, capitalism is not fair. It might not be fair, but he says that it is necessary for freedom. The reason why he's saying that is because freedom, you can work, achieve whatever amount of money you want. It's yours. Nobody puts a measure on that. You can work to build a building as big as you want. We have Burj Khalifa. We don't have Burj Khalifas everywhere. The Burj Khalifa belongs to the people of the United Arab Emirates. It belongs to the emirs of Arabs. You know, the Emirates, the people of Arab, you know. Now, another thing he said is that being a capitalist, working hard, achieving your things, does not really necessitate for someone else to be poor. Because according to the argument of the young man was pointing out some countries have benefited from exploiting and really stealing other countries' resources for them to become rich. When he said like a country like South Africa has really grown rich, and he thinks that the country of South Africa has grown rich because it's stealing resources and it's exploiting Africans and free labor, which free labor is never productive. It's never productive. However, we cannot remove point of exploitation of Africans. We have Africans being exploited for the richness. Capitalism is not all about exploitation. Capitalism is more than that. We cannot just condense capitalism in a way that because you have something big than the one I have, you must have done something wrong. You must have gone nasty. We have even Africans, yes, Africans with the same mindset. They think because you own something, you must have done some nasty things to have what you have. No. Capitalism ensures people grow rich. Capitalism is a freedom, but it is not the sufficient. It's not the optimal. It's not the best, but it is necessary. We have things which are necessary. Conditions necessary for there to be a rust. We need what? We need oxygen and we need steel. When these three things, when they meet together, come together and they create rust. Iron 3 oxide, that is what they create, rust. And if one of them is missing, we don't have rust. In as much as how many of them, what their quantity. When one is missing, the whole thing is not. So capitalism ain't about just somebody exploiting someone or somebody exploiting a system for them to grow rich. Those Africans who still have that mindset, man, you belong to the 18th century. Go back. We also have to discuss the effects that capitalism has brought to Africa. Yes, we have to discuss how has capitalism affected Africans. Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, my three favorite African countries. We also have Sierra Leone, we have Liberia, we have Nigeria. Nigeria is very rich in oil. Nigeria is very, very rich. But what has happened in Nigeria? Nigeria has a lot of oil, probably even more than Dubai. Oil in Nigeria was discovered before the oil in Dubai. Look at Dubai, where it is right now. Look at Abuja. Look at Lagos. You cannot compare Lagos and Dubai. You can't. Dubai, Nigeria came before Dubai. They discovered oil first. So they had the advantage of time. They cultivated and they must have, because of bad leadership. Sometimes it's not about somebody exploiting something. It's not about that way. No. There's a lot about capitalism. There's a lot about it. I don't want to touch about communism, but there's a lot about it. And now I want us to discuss the effects, the side effects, the disadvantages of capitalism to the development of African nations. This is what we need to understand. Capitalism has played a significant role in both the colonization of Africa and the perpetuation of neocolonialism in present-day West African countries, such as my three favorite countries in West Africa, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. It's time I explain how capitalism facilitated the process of colonialism, neocolonialism, past slavery, which is now leading to economic exploitation and dependency on aid from the West. We don't need aid, we need trade. That is what the Chinese are bringing to us. Trade, not aid. During the era of European colonization, capitalism served as a driving force behind the scramble for Africa. European powers sought to exploit Africa's vast natural resources, labor force, and market for their economic gain. The capitalists encouraged competition among European nations to establish colonies, extract resources, establish trade routes. This led to the partitioning of Africa without regard to ethnic boundaries or the well-being of its indigenous population. And this is why you find that we have Maasai in Kenya and Maasai in Tanzania. How comes we have Maasai here and Maasai there? And if one wants to go to the other side to meet his relatives, he needs to show his passport. He needs to have a visa to go and see his relatives. In South Africa, we have the Swana, we have the Zulu. These people are moving across freely, but now they can't move because of these boundaries, because of the capitalism. Now colonialism has brought neocolonialism, and now this has brought what we call apartheid, and now it has brought what we call visa policy. Visa policy, you know very well, Africa does not need this. Why then does the white man not use it in his country, but he uses it in Africa? Africans should remember how Africa was once one country before the coming of the white man. It was the capitalist idea that brought about the division of Africa into different parts. Now, the capitalist mode of production has fueled the exploitation of African labor. Colonial powers implemented systems such as forced labor, slavery and indentured servitude to extract resources and maximize profit. Africans were coerced into working on plantations, in mines and infrastructure projects under harsh conditions and minimal compensation. The profits generated from these ventures flowed back to the colonial powers, enriching their economies to the expense of the African nations. Furthermore, capitalism laid the groundwork for neocolonialism in West Africa, states in West African countries following decolonization. You know, France is the country which has mostly colonized Africa, West Africa. They started by Morocco, then they went downwards to other African countries as well. So France predominantly colonized West Africa. While political independence was achieved by many African nations in the mid-20th century, economic independence remained elusive. Capitalist interest, primary former colonial powers, and multinational cooperation continued to dominate the economy of well-independent states. Neocolonialism is characterized by economic dependence, where former colonial powers and multinational cooperation maintain control over key sectors of the economy, such as finance, trade, and natural resources. You saw what happened with Niger. Niger stopped the exploitation of uranium to France. Niger was literally powering France while it was dark. Niger is dark, but is making another country to have light. What's the irony? The president of Senegal, Diomaye just said, no, we are not exporting fish no more. We are not exporting fish. African fish is staying in Africa. This is what we need to do. We should serve ourselves first. Then the surplus, we can export the surplus, you know. We cannot starve our own people, then serve the people of outside. No. Charity begins at home. That is how I know, that is how I've been taught. Charity begins at home. Where is charity at your home? Do you have charity where you are? You should start at home with the charity. Yes, at home. Charity. Neocolonialism is characterized by economic dependence, depending on other people, such as the ones we see, how the UK, the USAID. No, we don't need that no more. So capitalist structures such as in unequal trade agreements, debt bondage, and foreign investment perpetuate economic exploitation and hinder the development of indigenous industries. In West African states, capitalist interests have led to a cycle of poverty, underdevelopment, and instability. The extraction of natural resources such as oil, gold, and cocoa has enriched foreign entities while leaving local population impoverished and marginalized. The average person in Niger did not have electricity. The average person in Niger could not earn even $2 in a day. They had the natural resources to make sure that nobody suffers, nobody is poor, but these natural resources were being taken to France. What a hypocrisy! What a hypocrisy! Claiming that you have the moral stand by, to stand and tell someone you're wrong, to stand in the UN, tell them you are wrong, I'm telling you the truth. Take away your hypocrisy. Clean yourself first before you come clean someone else's house. Teach yourself first. We've seen that in West African states, capitalist interest has led to a cycle of poverty, underdevelopment, and instability. The extraction of natural resources such as oil, gold, and cocoa has enriched these people. Africa are not benefiting from what they need. Additionally, the pursuit of profit has often come to the expense of environmental degradation and social dislocation, you know. Moreover, capitalists have exacerbated inequalities within African societies of the West African places, you know, African societies, or rather African countries, you get me. The pursuit of profit has led to the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few elite individuals and multinational corporation, while the majority of the population struggles to make ends meet. This economic disparity has fueled social unrest, political instability, and in some cases, violent conflict. Conclude with all that the gentleman said, Friedman, this is what I can say. Capitalism, as he explained, played a pivotal role in the colonization of Africa and the perpetuation of neocolonialism in present-day West African states. The pursuit of profit and economic exploitation have driven European powers to colonize Africa, leading to the plundering of its resources, the exploitation of its people. Furthermore, capitalist interests continue to dominate the economies of West African states, perpetuating economic dependency, inequality, and instability. Addressing these issues requires a re-evaluation of the role of capitalism in shaping global economic relations and a commitment to fostering equitable and sustainable development in Africa. Thank you to someone like Friedman. Africans and the entire human race can be able to understand the mechanism of capitalism. And remember, slavery and colonialism are the worst thing that ever happened to the black person.